Welcome back again, everyone. It's Dina Kalmud here with CWW7 News. And for today's broadcast, we have a lot to talk about. I wanted to bring you up to date concerning some new developments in regards to the United States and China, as well as Russia, Israel, Germany, and France. But I first would like to start with the U.S. and China. The Japan Times is reporting the United States for the first time urged China to remove missile systems deployed to contested man-made islands in the South China Sea. The move, believed to be the first time the U.S. had directly addressed the issue, came in a statement recapping high-level talks between the two sides in Washington on Friday. The United States called on China to withdraw its missile systems from disputed features in the Spratly Islands and reaffirmed that all countries should avoid addressing disputes through coercion or intimidation. Meanwhile, Beijing says its facilities in the waters are for defensive purposes. But some experts say that this is part of a concerted bid to cement de facto control of the South China Sea. Jeffrey O'Daniel, a research fellow at the Pacific Forum, stated on Twitter that although the demand by the U.S. was a first, it was very unlikely that China would heed that call. He said China faced no consequences when it ignored U.S. calls to halt reclamation and new construction in the South China Sea, adding that there was no reason for it to fold now. It goes on further to report that in their talks, the United States insisted it was not pursuing a new Cold War with China, though the two powers could only paper over their deepening differences. The two rivals' defense chiefs and top foreign affairs officials met with a regular dialogue that had been pushed back amid months of spiraling tensions between the two sides. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo stated that the United States is not pursuing a Cold War or containment policy with China. Rather, we want to ensure that China acts responsibly and fairly in support of security and prosperity in each of our two countries. Still, Pompeo also was clear in addressing U.S. concerns, including Beijing's increasingly assertive posture in the South China Sea. He said, "We have continued concerns about China's activities and militarization in the South China Sea. We press China to live up to its past commitments in this area." Meanwhile, a leading Chinese military general has warned that a confrontation between the United States and Chinese warships in the South China Sea would be a disaster, amid fears that this event remains at a very high chance. The Chinese defense minister has issued a stern rebuke of the U.S. and warned that an accidental clash between the two countries could erupt in a global war. This comes just a day after the Chinese unveiled newly developed high-tech weapons, including supersonic missiles and stealth drones. In addition, Beijing also stated that the United States should stop sending ships and military aircraft close to islands claimed by Beijing. China's defense minister warned that a confrontation between the two powers would spell disaster for all. Meanwhile, USNI News is reporting that the United States Navy submarine force is creating an aggressor squadron as one initiative to ensure all subs are combat ready as the service trains to take on China and Russia, stated the commander of Naval Submarine Forces. Vice Admiral Charles Richard, who took command in August, drew attention during the change of command ceremony by telling the force to prepare for battle. He has backed up those words with actions in months since, moving ahead with a plan updated in March to reflect the National Defense Strategy that includes refocusing training and certification on combat and developing new tools and concepts to support high-end war fighting. The plan, called the Commander's Intent for the United States Submarine Force and Supporting Organizations, led to an overhaul of training for the attack submarine force. Richard stated that we have restructured and retuned the fast attack training period to ensure that we're ready for that high-end fight, including restructuring what we used to call the Tactical Readiness Evaluation, and it is now a Combat Readiness Evaluation to ensure we're focused on war fighting. We've updated the deployment certification process to eliminate duplication, put the right focus in the right place. I'll tell you that I am driving to put competition in everything we do inside the submarine force. I want to produce winners and losers, just like we do in battle. It does you no good to be at standards if your opponent is more at standards than you are. You still lose. And in this competition, you may not come home. The new aggressor squadron fits in with the desire to create more high-end sub-on-sub competitions and ensure the Navy is ready to win. Richards said the plan mimics what the naval aviation community has at Top Gun. So it definitely seems obvious that the United States is preparing for a war. But it's not only the United States. I have brought you guys reports in the past in regards to Russia, China, and Israel also preparing for war. So definitely a very tense situation. And speaking of tense, just last week I brought you guys a report in regards to the French president stating that he wanted to create a true European army. Well, now Germany is agreeing with him. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has called for a real true European army to be created just days after the French president did the same and received backlash from President Trump for doing so. Merkel stated that we should work on a vision of one day establishing a real European army. That statement was an apparent nod of support to the French president, who last week said that Europe has to protect ourselves with respect to China, Russia, and even the United States. Europe cannot do so, he said, unless we decide to have a true European army. His statement, however, did not sit well with U.S. President Donald Trump, who lashed out at his French counterpart on Tuesday and noted that France's problem during World War II wasn't the U.S., Russia, or China. It was Germany, stating the following in a tweet. He said Emmanuel Macron suggests building its own army to protect Europe against the United States, China, and Russia. But it was Germany in World Wars I and II. How did that work out for France? They were starting to learn German in Paris before the United States came along. Pay for NATO or not. However, the French president seems entirely unfazed by events of the past, as he and Merkel were pictured hugging and holding hands at the unveiling of a plaque last week in France. Meanwhile, historian and international affairs specialist John Longland told RT News that the usual story that France was liberated by the Americans is only partly true, while also slamming the notion of a European military as being totally absurd. The idea of the European army is a complete fiction. There's never been a European army, and there cannot be a European army, he stated. He also added that the EU cannot legally be independent from NATO unless it changes its treaties. However, the French and German presidents aren't the only ones to call for the creation of a European armed forces. EU Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker was previously widely criticized for making the same suggestion, particularly by the UK, a close ally of the United States. Eventually, there will be a 10-nation coalition that will form. It's only a matter of time. And we are seeing evidence of that right now with Germany and France. So definitely very prophetic. And I will continue to keep you updated as these reports continue to be developed. But I would like to move on and talk about the United States and Russia. A Russian envoy is warning the United States that if the U.S. places missiles in Europe, dramatic events will follow. Russia has fired a sensational threat to President Trump, warning that the U.S. could trigger dramatic events across Europe if Washington stations more missiles in the continent. The Russian ambassador to the European Union warned of such a move risks dramatically escalating political tensions in the region, mirroring how the U.S. missile deployments in Western Europe sparked protests throughout the 1980s. The latest threat comes after Donald Trump last month pulled the U.S. out of the INF Treaty. The U.S. president has claimed Russia persistently breached the treaty, an accusation Moscow was quick to deny. Speaking in Brussels, Mr. Shahov warned, so what are the next plans of the U.S. administration after leave of the INF? If they plan to deploy missiles in Europe, that might lead to dramatic events across Europe, including domestic politics. The Russian envoy warned Europe was the biggest loser from the decision from the United States to exit the treaty, which has triggered fears across the continent of a potential new arms race. He also said any new missiles deployment from the U.S. in Europe would have a destabilizing effect even if they were conventional weapons. Moscow has already claimed non-nuclear U.S. missile defense batteries deployed in Romania and being built in Poland that do violate the INF Accord. He said it was evident in 1987 and continues to be. The big winner was Europe, because Europe was the place where American medium and shorter range missiles were deployed, and Europe was consequently the target of similar Soviet missiles. The EU has urged the US to consider the consequences of the plan. Definitely some rising temperatures between the United States and Russia concerning this particular issue, and I will definitely continue to keep you updated. But I would like to switch gears and talk about Israel next. And speaking of serious tension, it is being reported by the Jerusalem Post that Israel has struck 160 targets in the Gaza Strip after almost 500 rockets were fired. And now a rabbi is warning that the Gaza clashes could mark the start of a biblical war, more horrifying than anything we could imagine. A former Israeli army rabbi has warned that the current Gaza clashes could mark the start of a holy war. Pinchas Winston, a former chief rabbi of the IDF, said he believes the current fighting in the Gaza Strip, or Israel's battle with neighboring Syria, could cause an apocalyptic war. Winston told Breaking Israel News that the IDF should be ready for a biblical war that may arrive at any moment without any warning. He said any student of history knows that the hindsight is 20/20, but in the moment, you never know what can set off a war. Winston said he believes that the current Gaza conflict could be akin to the Old Testament's War of Gog and Magog, a war so devastating it precipitates a messianic redemption. It goes on further to report that it comes as the Israeli army announced it is reinforcing armored corps and infantry units near the Gaza Strip on Tuesday. The Israeli Air Force struck over 100 Hamas and Islamic Jihad targets on Monday night, including a munitions, warehouse weapons factory, and a military compound, and a Hamas public security office. Israel came under a heavy barrage of rocket fire from the Gaza Strip on Monday, a day after a flare-up in which an Israeli officer and 7 Palestinians were killed. An anti-tank missile launched from Gaza hit a bus in southern Israel, severely wounding a 19-year-old soldier. The Israel Defense Forces said the Iron Dome missile defense system intercepted around 100 out of some 370 launches from Gaza. EU ambassador to Israel also tweeted in response to the escalation, following with great concern the situation and indiscriminate firing of rockets towards the south of Israel. Attacks on civilians are unacceptable and need to stop. Everyone must step back from the brink. All of that said, at the time of producing this video, a ceasefire is in effect. So definitely wars and rumors of wars, as well as distress of nations. And concerning the Gog and Magog war, that is actually a very serious war that will include many different nations, not just a couple of them. In fact, as I reported on prior broadcasts, Russia, Iran, and Turkey will lead the charge concerning that war. But definitely some very prophetic events all around happening right now. And I will definitely continue to keep you updated as these reports continue to be developed. But please do leave your comments in the comments section. Tell me what you think. Also, come and visit us on Facebook, where we have these stories and many more, as well as our website at www.cww7news.org. All right, everybody, thank you for watching, and I will see you in my next video. God bless.